lineouts, rucks,
engage! What an amazing try!
tries, and tackles, dissected by South Africa's top rugby minds.
That is world class!
This is To The Last Drop, your weekly in-depth rugby podcast with Liam Delcom and Brenden Nell.
So, guys, we just finished recording the pod yesterday afternoon, and overnight the sad news came in about Cornal Hendricks passing away at the age of 37 from a heart attack. Of course, details are still coming out about exactly what happened, but we thought we'd just start the pod by just paying tribute to one of the big big personalities of South African rugby. We both knew him pretty well. We both had lots of dealings with him, and it's really, it's one of those that hits you hard because, sometimes we celebrate the big players in rugby, but we don't celebrate the big personalities all that much. And he was definitely a big personality. So just on my memories from him, obviously this is all very fresh now. We'll be doing more of these probably in our publications over the next couple of days. But my memories of Cornal, one of my fondest memories was just before we went to Moscow for the 2013 Sevens World Cup. I had to do an interview with him, and he started by saying to me, he wanted to teach me Russian. And I said, why? And he started rattling off all these Russian phrases he heard. And I said to him, but Cornal, you guys are going to be in such a bubble. The team's in such a bubble in these tournaments. They don't get out to meet the locals. They're literally hotel, training field. I said, so where are you going to use all this Russian? He looked at me and he said, says that's very easy. You never know when you're going to have to explain to the KGB. So instead of doing the interview, we spent the next hour trying to do Russian phrases and him trying to teach me Russian, which wasn't very good, as I found out later when I tried to use some of those phrases, but they didn't really mean what he thought they meant. So, there's other stories as well, but he was just such a character there.
No, absolutely. He was a character, a much loved one as well. A lot of things just came naturally to him. I mean, his compassion and his fighting spirit. I think a lot of people will know about his heart condition. In fact, it put his career in peril at various stages, but he fought through it. And I think in the end, he had a wonderfully distinguished career. The thing that stands out for me was my first interview with him after he became a Springbok. We sat down in the foyer of the hotel in the Nelspruit that the Boks frequent. Where they usually stay at in the build-up to a test in Nelspruit. And he gave me this great interview. I mean, we didn't really know each other that well before that, but he spoke from the heart, and it was one of those things where I walked away from that interview, and it doesn't happen often, but I was tearful because he shared so generously. I mean, he spoke about his upbringing in Wellington, a suburb called Hillcrest, but he said that the community called it Peyton, and how deeply... how proud he is to be from Peyton. I mean, it was a humble upbringing, and I think he worked at a bottling plant at one point. But the point he made was that how immensely proud he was of his community. And in fact, I'll just read you the final paragraph of the interview I did with him. He said, "I never feel sorry for where I come from. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm from Peyton. I'm not ashamed to say that I grew up poor. That is a lot of young people's excuse when they don't get ahead. It doesn't matter where you come from. You can dream and persevere." And as I said, I mean, I walked away from that interview a little tearful. That's almost gave me a new perspective of what it is to be a Springbok and the different places we can draw people from and bring them to that central point where they become idolized by South Africans. And certainly the obstacles of the place in his way, he overcame, and he did so with aplomb.
Yeah, I think we could probably fill up a whole podcast with stories of Cornal. He's one of those players that really everybody has a story about him. Everybody's got a way he impacted in your life. But for now, I think as the news is still fresh, I just want to say condolences to his family, to his mom, Rachel, his wife, Stephanie, and his two kids. Certainly somebody who's going to be really missed. The biggest smile on the field always. And the guy who's really passionate about the game. On that, when we leave now, you'll hear the rest of the pod as we recorded it yesterday. But for now, our thoughts are with Cornal and his family. This is To the Last Drop. I'm Brenden Nell.
And I'm Liam Carme.
Welcome back, Liam. You were off in a very sunny place the last week. Not doing much rugby, I believe, but kicking a ball around somewhere.
Yeah, I went to a sunnier climb. Work demanded that I fly northeast to these rocky outcrops in the middle of the Indian Ocean. I had to go attend the FIFA Beach Soccer World Cup, which was fun. I saw sand being kicked in certain people's faces and so on. Not much as much rolling around in the sand as you would see on the on grass pitches, because for obvious reasons. But yeah, players are still impetuous. They feel there's always a wrong that's been committed against them. All those vibes still persist. But I have to say it was it's a very physical sport, which is not what you necessarily associate with beach soccer.
Well, I think the only thing could be better would probably be beach volleyball, but that's Olympic sport.
Yeah, we don't have to go into that.
Yeah, but welcome back, and you in a week where there's going to be lots of rough play around on the fields. The final round of the URC is up, and I think before we get into that and the fixtures for the weekend and the permutations, a couple of things that happened this past week. I think we can start off with the Lions not making it, shooting themselves in the foot. They were, of course, out before they even got a chance to play on Sunday, and then they produced a performance which was, by any standards, very poor, but by their own standards, probably typical of their season. I think the frustrating thing for me was just after the game, listening to the press conference. I wasn't there, but listening to the tape of the press conference, how Coach Ivan van Rooyen made it out as well. We just made too many mistakes on defense. It was just another one of those. If small margins went our way, and just sat there thinking to myself, you know what? At some point, you've got to own up to the season. And we've spoken on it before about just how poor the Lions have been and how they don't seem to be growing as a group, as a team. And there's going to be a lot of introspection there. Now they're out. There should be. How do you carry on with that coaching team? They've had 4 years. That's a whole World Cup cycle. Springbok coaches don't even make it in a whole World Cup cycle if they don't perform. Lots of coaches. Ireland, 3 of their 4 teams have fired coaches this year during the season. So it's a difficult one. And how does Ivan van Rooyen just continue?
Well, it's been almost like a systemic thing where post-match when they've copped a defeat, where you ask a question that is more to do with the season and systems that are in place, or you get an answer where they answer something from the specific game. They'll talk about maybe they turned over possession, or they were beaten to the punch at the rack, how they were not good under the high ball. But questions have been asked about how can you turn around an entire season? In fact, not just one season, it's a few seasons we can talk about here. So there has been a bit of ducking and diving as far as that's concerned. And I even had a short conversation with the owner, Altman Alles, at halftime, not of the last game, but the previous one. And I asked him a similar question. And he was eager to point to how referees have wronged the Lions in a couple of games, or officials have wronged the Lions, where if those results went their way, things could have been a little different. Now, if you were to hand the Lions all those points at that stage that he was referring to, and they still end the season the way they did, or the build up to it now, it would still have left them out of the top 8 placing. So, yeah, they clearly need to do something, and by repeating the same thing every year, they certainly not. If you look at their fan base, I don't think there's much confidence. There can't be much confidence among their fans that things will turn around anytime soon and be better, because he suggests they're quite happy to stick their heads in the sand.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, most coaches don't get this long of a lifeline. And we talk, when I say it's a World Cup cycle, in the URC it's a World Cup cycle, 4 years, 4 seasons. But Ivan van Rooyen's been there for 6 seasons. His win record in the URC is 47%. His win record overall, I think, is 43%. And you ask yourself how any coach survives in the modern professional game with a record like that. And I'm sure there's factors. And he went on Sunday after the press conference about if they'd got the 2 tries against Cardiff and if they had this and if and buts. And
No.
Problem is professional sport doesn't work like that. It's brutal. It's harsh. And you've got to face the fact that sometimes you're just not good enough. And sometimes a coach just isn't in the right environment. I've said that before. And we all raised eyebrows when he was taken from S&C coach from Johan Ackerman's days and made head coach. And now 6 seasons later, no success, no top 8, no European Cup for the 4th year in a row, Investec Champions Cup. If you're going to stick your head in the sand again, that's not his fault. Then it has to turn to the owners and say, but why? What do you see that we don't see?
And we need to, there's not a disclaimer, but we probably need to point out we asked Lions owner Altman Ouders to be part of the show this week, but he couldn't be. There's some logistical issues, so he couldn't be with us. But hopefully we can get on soon. And I'm sure there are Lions fans who would love to hear, an owner's perspective, maybe talk about their business model, if that's going to be looked at, because if they're happy with their business model, obviously there's a trickle-down effect to how they recruit, who are in the key positions, etc., etc. So, yeah, hopefully we can twist his arm and get him on.
Yeah, I think so. Because, I mean, let's be honest, Ellis Park is an iconic stadium. The people don't really want to go to Ellis Park anymore because of the area around it. There are plans there. I know the Lions have had plans and they've had problems with every time Johannesburg changes a mayor, those plans are set back to revitalize the Doornfontein precinct. But just overall, it just feels like something needs to change desperately there. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear his words about it, and we'll definitely try and get him on. From that, Liam, across the Yuxkay, and while you were away, Jake White was fuming the other day about Curtly Aronson not being there. Again, yes. And because I actually asked the question, and it was quite funny because I asked the question.
Oh, no.
I went into the stats, and I went in and I said, I looked at, and there's no Bulls in the URC top stats amongst all the individual stats. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? This is actually you can spin it a nice way and say, well, this year it was more of a team effort. It's not the game breaker who tops all the stats who's got you through to where you are. And that
doesn't sound like a slight on the, that doesn't sound like a slight on the Bulls. And in fact, it's probably a fill-in cap.
And I asked him that, but let's listen to Jake's answer, and then you'll see how he turned it around.
Sorry, Ben, I'm going to tell you it's not good and bad. I mean, the stats have changed because Curtly's overseas. Curtly's probably top of the pops in the Mitsubishi Boars team in the Japanese league. And that's the same thing. I tell you, it's not good for South African rugby that the best players who make the line breaks are playing all over the world and not for our franchises. So it's not a good and a bad thing. It's a bad thing. It's a very bad thing that you build a guy and you bring him to the club and you make him who he is, and then you don't have the luxury of having him when you need him the most and at the best time of his career. And unfortunately, that's going to happen more and more, and it's not something that I'm going to, eventually tell you guys, oh, well, let it be. It's very sad that we get to a stage where we talk a lot about bringing players through, but our jobs are not to find youngsters, pay their school fees by putting them in big games and then selling them or handing them over to other clubs to become rock stars. I mean, we're not in that industry. We're in coaching. We're in a country where winning is important. We're in a country where rugby is important. So sorry to lumber the same point, but there's no good in that comment, that your stats are different. The player that we had that used to do all those things isn't here, and that's not through our design.
I understand. Just on him, is there any clarity about when I know the Japanese league determines that, but I suppose, is there any light at the end of the tunnel that he might be back?
Well, I think the horse was bolted. I think he was a cut-off date. He won't be back to play for us. So, I mean, that's been put in the paper. Quibus wrote about that. And there's a lot of things in the paper that I read, guys, that you guys know more than me. So, yeah, I mean, I read today that one of my props is signed with another franchise. I didn't even know that my prop is still under contract for 2 years. So, again, I ask you guys the question. I didn't realize that you can sign a guy when he's got 2 years left. And it's, if you've got 2 years left, you can't really chat to a player while he's still under contract. And again, I've heard the same about Curtly Arendse, and I'm concerned because there seems to be no watchdog when it comes to who's signing who, when they're going, who's talking to who, who goes overseas, who can stay. I mean, just really, all the sort of things are fascinating to sit on the outside and look. So Brenden and I, another player signed for another franchise, and all I hear about is salary caps and restrictions and all that sort of stuff. So I can't answer you, but I will say whatever I know, you know, and it's in the paper. So 1 week I read Curtly not keen to come back. But he's got a year and a half left on his deal. And I read today Simpiwe wants to go to the Sharks. He's got 2 years left on his deal. So next year you're going to tell me, isn't it amazing? The stats show that your lucid prop makes less tackles than the one you had last year. And probably right, because the lucid prop I had this year has gone to another club.
So it's quite
bull in a China shop.
Yeah, he obviously didn't take my question quite like I intended it, but he went on the next night about how to go at the agents and how players should be staying here. And look, not to get too much into Jake's argument, but his argument is that if we're going to compete in Champions Cup, Investec Champions Cup, we have to have a team of internationals. He says you look at Leinster and they 23 internationals in their team. Maybe not the best example this year, but over the last couple of years, but you look at a team like Toulouse or Bordeaux, and there's at least a dozen internationals in that match day 23. And until we get to that, he says we're not going to compete. And he says he doesn't see, he's not in the business, his words were, I'm not in the business of developing players for overseas clubs. I want to develop players so they win trophies in South Africa. And it's a bit of a strange one because we've gone down this road before when Alistair was coach, where they only picked South African-based players, and it was a bit of a disaster. Maybe not just for the reasons of picking South African, there was other factors also involved. But and at the moment, it's hard to argue with the Springbok model that's won 2 World Cups and that is so successful. But I also see Jake's point in a way because the Springbok model works for the Springboks. And slowly, it's started to work for the URC guys as well because a lot more players are staying in South Africa now, but you're still going to lose players. And it's not just Curtly Arendse. You'll maybe just listen to John Dobson here talking about Manie Libbok, who had to go away for, he was going to go away for a sabbatical also in Japan. And the reasons around there, because he says they won't be able to keep him otherwise. Let's have a listen to Dobbo.
I suppose the first conversation was to get him sort of back on the field and then have a chat to him. So I can't give you, I don't want to sit here, you guys are all part of the project, I don't want to sit here and say Manie's definitely staying. Yeah, I think chances of Manie going on a sabbatical or Manie, it's tricky, we gave Andre Smith a sabbatical. What it allows us to do in those situations, it allows him to earn money that can change his life and also extend with the Stormers and extend at a rate that we could probably afford, because our model of ownership's a little bit different perhaps to some of the other big franchises, So, and then, you're not going to say Manie has a chance to change his life financially. I mean, he's done so much good for us, been a big part of this franchise and the success we've had over the last few years. I don't think we'll say no to that. But I promise you, we haven't literally sat with Manie, his agent, and said, okay, let's try and work out a plan. He is signed like Sasha to 27. And there is, of course, a management issue between Sasha and Manie. That I could pretend it's, we've avoided it this year by injury, but we don't always want to be like that. So there are probably a couple of conversations to happen. Now he must play next Friday. He will play next Friday, and he'll have a role to play in us in the playoffs.
So this becomes a tougher one for coaches, especially the local franchises coaches, to keep players here in South Africa. I don't know there's no magical answer. Money's always going to, rule the roost here. But somehow we've got to find a way of keeping players more that we can develop squads, the teams, because successful teams are together for a number of seasons and they develop into champion teams.
Look, it was certainly South African rugby's favour, given monetary constraints over the last number of years, that some of the marquee players are playing abroad, earning top dollar, competing with, with their peers. And until that situation changes, yeah, I think we've done remarkably well, not just in the Rugby Championship to be competitive with our Southern Hemisphere counterparts, but then also, the ability to win 2 Rugby World Cups, not to be sniffed at. We basically used what was at our disposal and maximized it. Hopefully, things will change after June this year, where there will be a little bit more money at SA Rugby's disposal when they become full partners in the URC. They'll take a 25% stake. But apart from that, some of the major expenses, including travel in particular, they don't have to basically carry that burden all by themselves. So there will be more money in the domestic rugby ecosystem. How that will be divvied up, we are yet to establish, because there will be some robust talks about how money should be distributed between the unions. And as much as the main franchises actually play in the URC, how much, they will probably say, no, we need the lion's share of this. There will be others who say, no, wait a minute, we also provide you, with players. So, there will be more money, but whether that will fundamentally change how players, what will change their minds, we think they decide they've got a better offer at Toulouse or Northampton, or whether they want to go play in Japan. We have to see that, whether that will have a real impact. My guess is FIFA will leave, because there certainly will be a little bit more money to spend.
I think you're always going to lose a couple of players. Arceus Snyman's a guy like that's probably a good example of that. You're not going to keep him there. I think where Jake does have a point is, and he said before he got to the Bulls, if you look at the locks they had, just Arce and Jason Jenkins were the 2 youngsters there, but they had Paul Willems, Eli Snyman, I'm trying to think, Erne Herbst, a number of these players. And if those players, if you look at the Leinster model as an example, or one of those teams, they players, Joe McCarthy, James Ryan, those guys are there for seasons. They would play almost the entire career at one club. And so if you have, obviously there's a counter effect of that, is that you block other players from coming through. But yeah, that sort of thing, I understand Jake's point in terms of when you want to build a squad, you need to build it over a number of years, and you need those players to stay. So I think we're always going to lose a couple. But I think the point is that you don't want to lose everybody. All those locks that the Bulls lost over 4 or 5 years, for instance, every time they brought a new guy through, he was gone. And I think that's what he's scared of happening at the moment, especially when you see, guys like Marnie and Kurti wanting to stay in Japan, and where the Bulls want them the Bulls and the Stormers want them for the playoffs.
But if you take all of that to its logical conclusion, using the Jake White argument, how many of those players in his squad currently would have been developed by the Bulls? In other words, if you take it back to primary school, high school, all the way through to playing URC, and some of them obviously Springboks, because it's one thing to have a go at the system in a sort of a franchise and an international level, but then if you're going to make the point, you also then need to you need to look at how the players arrive on your doorstep, and how much did you give. And it's not a question that he needs to answer, but it's a I suppose the Bulls as a union need to answer.
I think what happens is and this is not knocking a coach. All coaches buy players in the professional game. All the teams across the world buy players. Maybe less so in the French top 14, and then the big teams like Toulouse and that, they buy maybe a handful of guys, thinking Blake Kinghorn, Jack Willis, Leinster bring in a Geordie Barrett and Arceus Snyman, but it's not the majority of players that they buy. Most of them, they develop their own players, and I think our coaches have adapted to what they can do. But I think I don't know how to put this, but the system also works against you, because I've also known agents who've taken players overseas just because they can get a commission. And I remember one agent boasting to me that he had to buy his house. He had to put down the deposit at Pearl Valley, or what's it, the place in Cape Town? Val de Vie. And he couldn't wait to sign this one player in Japan because that would be his house deposit. And yeah, I mean, there's two sides to the story, and I don't think anybody's 100% right, but there should be. We need to find a way that benefits not only the Springboks but also the URC teams.
Yeah, look, it's a debate that we can probably spend a lot of time on. Maybe it's time to move on, and we've got a couple of big games coming up this weekend. Finally, out of league action.
Just before they do that, I want to ask anybody watching that we talked about the SA rugby model and them buying into Europe. We did ask Rian Oberholzer to come on. The last time he was on this pod, it was quite heated. It was about the equity deal. And I remember when I said to him, let's move on, he said, yes, please. He was quite happy to move on that we afterwards bring him.
That. And, I wouldn't say it was heat. I won't say it was heated. No, but it was, it was knocking on awkward.
Yeah. But I did chat to him yesterday, and he obviously has a full schedule, but he did give us the commitment he would come on. I think there's a couple of things we need to speak about at SA Rugby. They've obviously signed a number of sponsors. They're looking abroad for major sponsors. At the moment, the Springboks are going to be playing more overseas as well and more in other places. And they've got a total new test model as well. Which means the ticket prices. I know there's been some unhappiness with the ticket prices for the test this year as well. So it'd be good to get him on and just let him answer some of those questions. So if you do have any questions that we can put to Rian, please put them in the comments below or send it to us on Twitter, and we'll definitely try and get them in there. But let's turn to URC because it's a big weekend, a lot happening there. For the 10 teams still in contention.
Absolutely. There's a bit to play for. Teams still jockeying for position. Even if you just look at the top 8, where you're going to finish. I think if you look at the top 8, there aren't too many surprises. If you look at the current log, some people may be surprised by the Scarlets having almost secured their place in that top 8. But not too many other surprises, I have to say. They will have if you look at the potential quarterfinal lineup with one round to go, they'll be away to Glasgow Warriors, which not an easy game, but the Warriors haven't beaten themselves the last while.
No, they haven't beaten themselves since Leinster beat them in the Champions Cup, whitewashed them. They've really struggled since then. But yeah, I mean, a lot still can happen this weekend. The top 4 are entrenched. They've got their quarterfinals sewn up. Where they are exactly on that log, it looks like the Bulls will end up second. They play the Dragons. I can't see the Dragons coming in anywhere close to the Bulls having only won one game this entire season. And so the Sharks have got a chance to pass Glasgow because Glasgow play Leinster. And if Glasgow don't get a full house of points there, the Sharks can go past them as well, and especially if they lose. So yeah, there's a lot to play for them. And then obviously the rest of I don't think the Sharks, the Stormers can, I said Sharks, Stormers, I was going to say Stormers could get past in 5th place. And then 6 to 8 is quite open, those places there. So it all depends who does well.
I suspect the Stormers will be rooting for Glasgow Warriors this weekend.
Yeah, because if you look at the log,
because that opens up the possibility still of them playing a local derby in Durban against the Sharks.
Yeah,
which will obviously save them a lot of travel.
I've also heard that a lot of the Stormers players want to play in Durban, that there's no love lost there. So there's a bit of they think they've got a better chance in Durban than traveling, which understandable, because I don't think if you're a South African team, you want to play the Stormers at the moment in the form they're in at the moment as well.
No.
So
also they've got some of their big guns back the last month or so. So
yeah,
it could be
then if you look at the log, 6 are Scarlets, 7 are Benetton, 8 is Munster, 9 Cardiff, and Benetton, Munster, Cardiff all on 46, Scarlet on 48, and Edinburgh on 44 at 10th spot can still sneak in as well. It's going to be a bit of a bun fight, that. So, yeah, whoever comes in there, if you look at the fixtures, maybe we should just do the fixtures right now. Cardiff's big thing is they play the Stormers, and the Stormers are in good form. So that's a tough one for Cardiff. They are 9th, they're outside the top 8. Edinburgh play Ulster, which is also not an easy game, but it's in Edinburgh, and they can win that. If they get a full house of points there, they'll put a lot of pressure on everybody.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is for me, if you look at the top 8 the way it stands, and if it remains that way, Leinster hosting Munster in the quarterfinals will be quite a tasty match. I mean, you'll still make Leinster firm favourites, but Munster, as we well know, are quite capable of travelling and upstaging hosts who you can't expect they will advance to the next round or put their hands on the trophy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got a different point of view. I think we might only have one Irish team in the quarterfinals, which would be a turn up for the books.
Would be.
So, yeah, and then
why do I get the impression that you're kind of hoping for it, Brenden?
I'm not saying I actually like it when there's an upset or two. Benetton are playing Munster, and I quite enjoyed the way they played against Glasgow. They were sensational against Glasgow. At one point, 33-0 up. It was really amazing. So I quite enjoy, and I enjoy Marco Bartolome. He's a great guy to chat to as well. He's doing a great job there at Benetton, and they're punching above their weights, and it's good to see them playing some good rugby. So that'd be interesting to see that one. But let's do our predictions, and we can talk about those there as well. So starting off with the Cardiff Stormers, I can't see Cardiff winning that one. I think that's a Stormers win for me by about 10 points.
Yeah, the Stormers will have to. You get the sense the Stormers will have to be very loose, make lots of mistakes. They'll still probably score points, but if they can be a little bit more controlled in the way they do their business, I expect them to win by comfortably double digits. But it would have to be an out of the ordinary performance by Cardiff to upstage them.
Edinburgh, Ulster. I think Edinburgh being Ulster doesn't have anything more to play for. I think that's probably going to tilt it towards Edinburgh. Whether it be enough to get them in, we'll have to see. They'll have to play very well. But there's some players there obviously feel a bit aggrieved that they didn't get into the line. So maybe that will be also spur them on. So Edinburgh, but it will be a closer game than many expect.
Yeah, a bit of an arm wrestle, but I think the carrot that Edinburgh has, I think will spur them on.
Munster, Benetton. I think I'm going to go for the upset there. Or Benetton are one spot above Munster. And I see it's being played at the Virgin Media Park in Cork. So it's interesting, different venue. And I think Benetton might upset that one.
The fact that it's that it's in Cork does open the door a little bit more for Benetton. So I actually might join you on that one.
Then go to Saturday, Bulls Dragons. Only one winner here for me. Bulls. The score line depends on what team the Bulls pick, because there must be some sort of temptation for Jake to maybe let some of the players, these main players, maybe sit on the sidelines this week. It's an interesting debate whether they want momentum or do they want to give some players a rest.
If there then was ever an opportunity to rest some weary players, then this is it. I mean, I see if you're going to be mixing and matching and having to rotate players to save some for the business end of the competition, I can't think of a better occasion than this one for them to rest some players, some key players. I'm not suggesting you play a completely different 15 from the start, but I think the occasion certainly beckons for it.
Well, I think if you look at a player like Cameron Honeycomb, who tends to play 100 miles an hour every single game and gets hurt quite often and is often down during games, that's the type of player you might want to give a rest this week. But it'll be interesting to see. Lions, Ospreys. Nothing to play for either team. Ospreys have won at Ellis Park before. To me, it's a very difficult one to call. So I think probably Ospreys, just because I don't think the Lions are in a very good spot.
It will, not that last week didn't, but it will give us probably even a better sense of where the Lions are at mentally. So with nothing to play for, I think the Welsh team probably have a bit more show and to play for. So I'm going to go Ospreys. I mean, they've won here before, and the situation was a lot different then. So I'm going to go Ospreys.
Yeah, it's difficult to call everyone, but I mean, yeah, I don't have much hope for the Lions. Zebra, Connacht, another game that nothing in it for either side, 14th against 15th. I'm going to go for Zebra. I'm feeling very Italian today. So they've had a couple of big wins this season.
Yeah, last roll of the dice. Let's have a go. If the game was being played in Ireland, different story. But yeah, I give Zebra a good chance here.
Yeah, and then with Bet Sharks against Scarlets. Scarlets are on a 4-game winning streak at the moment. And they were very, very good against the Lions. They used their chances very well. So you still favour the Sharks, but with Edinburgh breathing down their neck and the fact that they'll know what Edinburgh did by the time they play this game might make it a bit more spicier, but I'd still probably favour the Sharks to win.
Yeah, a bit like the Stormers, the Sharks in certain areas of the game need to tighten things up. And if they do, they should win comfortably. But they are prone to have these moments in the game where they're not as switched on as they're supposed to be. But yeah, you'd still expect them to win this one.
The fact that also, they've got the chance of getting to third spot on the log. They need to win to do that. That'll also probably spur them on. So that's why I'll probably go for them. It's going to be an interesting game. It's strange. It was a tough one to call because you don't know how good Scarlets are going to be on the second week of their tour. They certainly have a lot to play for. So,
bit of a banana peel for those then.
Yeah. And then the big one, the Leinster Glasgow Warriors game. Big question is just how much damage did that last game between these two sides do to Franco Smith's side? They haven't been the same. Leinster certainly last week against Zebra, 76-5. They certainly sort of, that backlash from their loss in the Champions Cup was there.
Yeah.
If Jordie Barrett's playing, I can't see Leinster not winning this one, but Glasgow are going to be desperate to try and hold on to third spot.
Yeah, it's again, I don't know how many times a season we say this. Depends on what Leinster puts out in their 23, who they go with. But as we've seen, even when they put what we perceive to be a weakened side out there, often those players produce the goods. A week before quarterfinal, they probably, it is a bit of a juggling act for them. And they haven't always got it right, we have to say, but those are usually knockout games. So there will be some mixing and matching, I would imagine. It's a tantalizing game, but you would still have to say Leinster go into that game as favourites. But Glasgow need to pick themselves up at some point, and there's probably no better occasion than this weekend because, as you say, I mean, they have an awful lot to play for.
Yeah, you also wonder how much, I suppose if you, Leo Cullen and Jacques Nienaber, and you're talking about how you approach this game, you'd want momentum going into the playoffs, especially as this is your only competition you're in now, and there's the only one you can win, and you desperately want a trophy after, 4 years of not having a trophy. So you want that momentum, but just how much you got to, because if there's one criticism of Leinster, is probably that they've mixed the match too much, and they've over maybe rested some of their top players. So you want them in fine form. So do you keep it that same squad, or do you mix the match? If I was them, it's 4 games left. I'd keep it the same squad, to be very honest.
Yeah, you absolutely have to still, it's your last league game. So if you are going to rest players, this is probably the one to do it in. You don't want to be caught short in a quarterfinal, even if you come up against opponents who will be perceived as much inferior. You can't afford those slip-ups. I mean, there's no second chance. So if you are going to be playing around with your selectors, it's probably this weekend.
Yeah. So for me, if I had to choose the other 4 quarterfinalists that haven't been chosen, I would say Scarlets will make it. I would probably also give a spot to Benetton. And Stormers already there. So Stormers, Scarlets, Benetton. And I think then it's a toss-up between Edinburgh and Munster for that last spot.
Yeah, but it'll be a tough one to call.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a big weekend, but that's it for us tonight or today on this pod. It's going to be a spicy one. We'll be back next week. We'll chat a bit more about what happened. We'll have a clearer picture of the quarterfinals and hopefully a guest or two on that will come talk to us about either why their team is winning or why their team wasn't winning.
We'll do just that.
See you next week. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. For the latest insights and rugby analysis each week, plus new episode alerts, please follow or subscribe to the series. Or find all episodes at jacarandafm.com or the Jackpot app.